was born in McCall, Idaho on the 10th of November in 1995. After 3 months, my family relocated to the small town of Meadows, located several miles to the west. I've lived here for as long as I can remember, and it has been a major influence on my life for these past 18 years. It is because of this I decided to focus my senior project on the history of the town that helped me become who I am today. The Meadows Valley has been home to people for many years. Before the first permanent white settlement, the valley was often a stopping point for nomadic Native American tribes. These wanderers would stay in the valley to rest, hunt, and even bury their dead. Because so much is still unknown about the peoples who lived in the region due to a lack of a written history, I decided to direct my research towards the first permanent European settlement in the area, Packer John's Cabin, a small wooden structure located just north of the Meadows town site. It is impossible to discuss the history of our town without first mentioning the cabin. The structure is a state-protected historical landmark and paved the way for others to come and settle in the valley. In the fall of 1862, word reached the Idaho Territory's center of commerce, Lewiston, that gold had been discovered in the Boise Basin, near the city of Pioneersville. Because Lewiston was located along Idaho's major river systems and had access to the ocean, miners had to find a way to get materials from the Boise Basin to Lewiston and resources from Lewiston to the Boise Basin. In response, a man named John Welch loaded teams of mules with supplies and made the journey south. On his journey, John Welch, who came to be known as Packer John, traveled south, following the Little Salmon River. At one point he reached Goose Creek Pass, which had been blocked in by a very sudden, early snowdrift. Welch could not continue on his journey, so he and his men built the first permanent man-made structure in the region, a small wooden cabin. This cabin would have a lasting effect on the region and the entire state of Idaho. Welch and his men returned to Lewiston for the winter and stored the supplies inside the cabin. He continues to use the cabin to store supplies for most of his journeys. The cabin is still just as important today as it was to Packer John in his time. To many, the cabin is simply a location that many people drive by every day on their way to and from McCall. But it is more than that. The cabin represents our town's heritage and thus deserves our respect. Much is still unknown about Packer John's personal history. Some believe that John Welch the merchant was actually John Walsh, the mailman, who built the cabin as a place to stay as he carried mail back and forth from Lewiston and Boise. Before researching this project, all I knew about John Welch was his name and the fact that he built a cabin in the woods. There are numerous other stories behind this man. All of them contribute to the character who built the 24 by 18 foot cabin that stands today just outside the Meadows Valley town site. I have visited the cabin before, and it is really astonishing to see it standing after all of these years. In my opinion, the cabin stands as a symbol of the spirit of the early pioneers and their struggles as they settled this wilderness. On a broad scale, the cabin had a large impact on Idaho's history as well as the local history. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln appointed William H. Wallace as governor of the Idaho Territory. Wallace declared that there was a need for the election of members for the legislature and for a delegate to Congress. Packer John's Cabin was then selected for the locality for the first ever Democratic Territorial Convention. Today the cabin is a state landmark and stands as a monument to our town's heritage. Though the cabin was the first permanent structure in the area, the building was definitely not the last to be built in the region. It paved the way for the early settlements that would become Meadows and New Meadows today. Besides Packer John, the valley had many other visitors. There was the occasional fur trapper and hunter, but the first permanent settler was Billy Jolly, a man who came in the spring of 1877 to trap and hunt in the area. Jolly was followed by many other single men who came to live in the region. The first family to settle in the region was the White family in 1878. 118 years before my own family would move into the area. Calvin White, the head of the family, settled next to Packer John's cabin. Calvin is named the father of Meadows based on his large contributions to the area. Calvin built the first store, was the first postmaster, and generally became the founding father of the town of Meadows. With the help of several friends, he built the first road into Meadows Valley. White built a log house designed to accommodate travelers on their journeys, usually consisting of traveling between Boise and Lewiston. Before the Whites came to Meadows, it was known as Salmon or Little Salmon Meadows. But after White established a postal service in the area, the town was then called White's Mail Station. Between the 1880s and 1900s, the town was named Meadows, and by 1901 it had a population of 25 people. Meadows became a thriving community with a multitude of local businesses. The town had several blacksmith shops, several general stores, a hardware store, a barber shop, a saloon, a sawmill, and a post office. The town was finally platted, or mapped, in April of 1902. One of the biggest industries the early settlers were involved with was the agriculture industry. Some of the valley's earliest residents were ranchers and farmers who sought to practice their trades in the valley's fertile grasslands. Agriculture is still important today in the valley and is practiced by several of its residents. Valley residents such as the Campbell family still make their living from the beef industry. When the Pacific and Idaho Northern Railway came to the area, ranchers and farmers came to the region to transport their crops and livestock by railroad to other parts of the state and country. This increase in industry and population meant that there were large amounts of people traveling into the area, and that more people were settling in the area. Behind the move from Meadows to New Meadows is the man who is commonly named the current town's founder, Colonel Edgar M. Hiho. The early American West was a harsh place, and the railroad existed as a lifeline that controlled the fate of the young settlements. As Don Doff and Dale Fisk put it in their book, The P&IN, when the Pacific and Idaho Northern Railway was built into the west-central Idaho, it coldly executed half of the towns along its route and replaced them with its own creations. One of these creations, of the P&IN, was the town of New Meadows. Colonel Edgar M. Hiho was born in Essex, England, in late October of 1887. He came to the U.S. in 1894 at the age of 7. By the time Hiho was 11, he worked as an office boy at the Detroit Free Press in Michigan, and was financially self-sufficient. For several years he worked as a farmer, rancher, and even on several railroads before at the age of 32 he started working in Salt Lake City, Utah for the Oregon Short Line. In 1903, he started the Pacific and Idaho Northern Railway in Weiser, Idaho, as an auditor for the company. He worked hard and was promoted to the company's vice president and general manager a year later. In 1909, Hiho resigned from the company but was rehired in 1910 and was once again promoted, but this time to the position of president. Hiho was very active in Idaho politics. He was a stalwart Republican and even worked on the staffs of several Republican governors of the state. He also spent time in the Idaho National Guard, where he achieved the rank of colonel. Hiho worked on the staffs of 3 Idaho governors, such as Governor Frank Gooding, Governor John Haynes, and Governor James Brady. Hiho married his wife, Nora Alice Gwynn, in 1900 on September 26 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Together they had 3 children, a boy and twin girls. Their son's name was Cedric, and his daughters were named Virginia and Catherine. Besides the P&IN, Hiho was involved in many other businesses. Hiho was president of the Central Idaho Telegraph and Telephone Company, the director and vice president of the Weiser National Bank. He worked with the Washington County Land and Development Company and was president of the Cordior Development Company. Hiho was a very determined individual who worked hard to ensure that his plans were completed. Hiho used his connections in business and political connections to get ahead and become very successful. By using the Corridor Development Company, Hi-Ho would create the town of New Meadows. It would be moving as far north as the Meadows Valley region. People began to wonder whether or not the trail would actually go into town. When it was announced that the Corridor Development Company had purchased roughly 900 acres of land a few miles from the town of Meadows to build a new town site for the PNIN, the people of Meadows were upset. The townspeople decided to meet with Colonel Hi-Ho to express their concern, but he told them that the town of Meadows was not geographically practical to build the rail into that area. Hi-Ho told the people that the present town of Meadows is so geographically situated that should a railroad wish to join with the PNIN, it could only run into Meadows and out back again, to continue its journey either north or to the west, this making unnecessary trackage and distance. In an interview with my mentor, Mr. Krigbaum said that price was a big factor in the purchase of the land New Meadows currently resides on. Mr. Krigbaum said that Hi-Ho and his company bought the land for less than what they could have bought probably 10 to 20 lots up at Meadows. It was interesting to me that the town of Meadows was more of a business move by Hi-Ho than a vision for a new community, though it was common to see such practices by the railroad companies. Hi-Ho did take an interest in plotting out the town, however. He was very instrumental in designing the layout of several principal brick buildings. These brick buildings include the PNIN Depot, the old Meadows Valley Bank, and the Hotel Hi-Ho. Though the PNIN Depot and the old Meadows Valley Bank still stand today, the hotel burned down in 1929. Built in 1911, the Hotel Hi-Ho was marked as one of the finest hotels in Idaho. The hotel had 53 rooms and cost over $56,000 to complete. Hi-Ho had it built on the eastern half of town so that it could face his PNIN Depot. The hotel served as the new town social center, being the venue for plays, dances, and other gatherings and events. Sometime during the hotel's existence, its name changed to the Meadows Valley Motel. After the hotel burned down, the PNIN decided not to rebuild the structure. In 1911, the railroad had reached its final destination, the new town site that would become New Meadows. The town itself was constructed under Hi-Ho's leadership and planning. Hi-Ho had planned for the railroad to extend further north along the Little Salmon River and connect to the railroads of northern Idaho. Hi-Ho had also hoped that it could extend to the mining communities of the Seven Devils, where copper ore was being extracted. Mr. Krigbaum told me that they were drawing up plans to get the railroad to that point, the point known today as Railroad Saddle, but they never reached it. The PNIN ended in New Meadows, and Hi-Ho never saw his vision of completing a rail that joined the rails of northern Idaho to those of southern Idaho. The last spike of the New Meadows line was driven in during January of 1911. Hi-Ho definitely left a large mark on this town. If there is anyone to be considered the founder of New Meadows, it would be him. Looking around town, you see his legacy. From the PNIN Depot that stands as a testament to the company's influence in central Idaho, to the streets that are the namesakes of his family, Cedric, Nora, Virginia, and Catherine, all of which are intersected by Hi-Ho Avenue. Hi-Ho has been described as a sort of high-strung kind of guy. In November of 1917, Hi-Ho suffered a stroke. After resuming work despite doctor's orders, he suffered another stroke in September of 1918. Hi-Ho issued his resignation as president and general manager of the PNIN in 1919, as his health rapidly deteriorated. When he retired, he released a press statement that said, "It is needless to say that it is with deep regret that I disassociate myself from what has been almost literally my life's work, abandon my home and hearth in one of the loveliest valleys on earth, and leave the locality in which my children were born and where we had hoped to spend our days surrounded by a prosperous commonwealth, happy in having achieved the maximum possible development in which I might feel I had a part." Colonel Edgar M. Hi-Ho, the founder of New Meadows, died in his Boise home 7 years later in 1926. Based off of his statement, we see that Hi-Ho truly loved the area, and that he viewed the town, his creation, as he would have his own child. Hi-Ho's personal home still stands in the town today, and now serves as a hotel to those who come and visit his town. With the coming of the railroad, industry in the area reached new heights. For the area's ranchers, the railroad opened up new markets for their products and eliminated many of the previous hardships of the cattle industry. With the railroad, the businesses of the valley could trade much faster and more effectively than they could previously. The railway brought products, passengers, and raw materials to and from Idaho's large population centers. The P&IN depot became a hub of activity for the trading and shipping industry, especially when it came to cattle and lumber. It was the depot where the tracks of the P&IN ended. The building stood 2 stories and was constructed in 1911 for the price of $14,335. The building was a model of comfort, convenience, and luxury. The P&IN was purchased by Union Pacific Railroad in 1936. By 1950, the rail had abolished the passenger aspect and worked only in hauling lumber and cattle due to significant financial losses. By the late 1970s, the majority of cattle and timber were carried via truck, and thus the Union Pacific abandoned the rail in Meadows, abandoning the 5 miles of track located farthest north, leaving behind the depot. In 1996, the year my parents moved to New Meadows, the removal of the tracks began. The railroad, the lifeblood of New Meadows, was gone. The very last train of cattle left New Meadows in September of 1978, carrying 1,100 cattle. It took only 16 men, 1 year, to remove the rail line that had taken an estimated 2,000 men 24 years to build. It is sad to think that the work and toil of so many was to be removed by the work of so few. The age of the train and the P&IN was over in New Meadows, and with it New Meadows would face new challenges. How it dealt with these challenges defined how it would exist in the new modern age. The town has changed in many ways since Hi-Ho first started laying plans for his corporate headquarters. There are New Age buildings that stand alongside buildings that stood during the reign of the P&IN. Cattle ranching and timber still remain as strong industries among the region. Large businesses like Circle C Ranch and J.I. Morgan ensured their survival. However, through all the change, the spirit of the valley's inhabitants has remained strong. If you were to look at New Meadows today, you would find a community that is just as strong and resilient as John Welch, as community-oriented and committed as Calvin White, and as driven and creative as Edgar Hi-Ho. You will find a town that has a strong living history.